Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the Managing Director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, we're discussing so-called sponsored work permits. And I say so-called and we put sponsored in quotation marks because it really isn't a thing. It's just sort of a euphemism that's been kind of designed. And as I've discussed in other videos, this concept is basically getting someone to sponsor you for a work permit. And generally speaking, where I have seen this, you're basically not actually working for that entity, for that company, if you will. And it's basically an expedience. There's operators out there who say, oh, you can have a sponsored work permit through us or through this entity or whatever it is, however it's set up, depending on, it's generally a corporate structure and may have certain other certifications associated with it, but they say, oh, you can just get this work permit through us and pay us to maintain your work permit. And it's largely a pretext. I would even say maybe a pretense that that person is actually working there. Done a number of videos on this. It's not, in my opinion, it's not a good idea because if you don't actually work there, I mean, that's a species of fraud. You're basically doing and saying something that you're not actually doing. You're not actually working within that corporate structure. However, you know, there is a lot of talk about this, especially on the internet. A recent comment on our channel kind of put a fine point on it, and I thought it was worth addressing. Quoting directly, I hear what you're saying, and this is in another video about sponsored work permits. If this sponsored permit is illegal, etc., then how can this company continue to advertise online and on YouTube month after month after month without being closed by the authorities? They give their address and phone number. If you know about them and hundreds of other people, then the authorities must know as well, so how can they possibly still be in business? Well, first of all, don't presume from lack of action that it's tolerated. And, you know, I'm not saying there are any government authorities out there looking at this, but if they are, they're not going to just look at it cursorily and then pounce on somebody that's doing something illegal. They have to investigate. Also, never forget, law enforcement is a bureaucracy unto itself. It doesn't move at lightning speeds. Also, and this is just kind of the way Thailand operates, things that are not strictly in line with the law oftentimes sort of fly under the radar or fall through the cracks, if you will, for a fairly long, prolonged period of time before really negative consequences occur. Let me just give for example. There was a time in Thailand when physical visa running was essentially being circumvented because you hand your passport off to somebody, they'd take it over a border for you. It was usually involved, these visa run companies would often take a number of people and then they'd have a number of passports with them. You paid an extra fee to a visa company, so-called, and they'd take your passport over the border for you, and it'd be all stamped out and then stamped back in, and on paper, you left Thailand. This was a common occurrence some 20 years ago, and even up to the time I started operating out here around kind of the middle of the early aughts, from 5 going into 7, 8, 9, you would still hear about this. However, there were major arrests made, and there was a lot of negative consequences that came down on some of these operations that were doing this. And at the time, yeah, everybody knew it was not in line with the law. That's not how you're supposed to deal with doing a so-called visa run. Just as, in my opinion, and I think anybody that really looks at it, having a so-called sponsored work permit is not technically in line with the law. You need to be working where you claim to be working. You need to actually be working in the company you claim to be working in. Now, one can set up their own company and essentially, you know, with some extra steps, basically be self-employed through a company they own or a company they partially own in Thailand. But that's very different from just having someone get you a work permit solely as a pretext. Again, perhaps the better word is pretense. That's a totally different thing. And so, yes, there are examples in rather recent history in not a dissimilar set of circumstances where, yeah, there are practices that do fail to gain any major notoriety, and then when they do get noticed and when enforcement does come down the pike, if you will, things can get pretty bad for the folks that are involved. In fact, some of the things I heard about folks that got into trouble with respect to sort of fake visa running was, they lost their passport. Then there became issues where, there were fake stamps involved because fake visa running wasn't done anymore, and then it got, essentially it just spiraled down into ever greater problems. But if you were involved in it at the time, it could be a real issue. It's my understanding some of the people that were running these operations were arrested, in fact. The point of the video is, certain things can happen in Thailand, and they're not in line with the way the law, both the letter and the spirit of the law. Just because there hasn't been any immediate adverse consequences does not mean that it's impossible for that to happen in the future.